Hello, it's Pastor Penny, and it's June 29th, Monday. And this week, I'm going to talk about the Beatitudes. Maybe you haven't heard them for a while, and so I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoy it. So first, the first one, well, let me back up. So this is from Matthew 5, and the Beatitudes are 1 through 12. And so Jesus sees all these crowds, and like in so many other parts of the Gospels, he is being followed by huge groups of people who want to just see who he is. They've heard about his healing, his teaching, and rumors that he's the Messiah. And so they want to see him and meet him. So he sees, it says, when Jesus saw his ministry drawing large crowds, he climbed a hillside. Those who were apprenticed to him, the committed, climbed with him, and they arrived at a quiet place. And he sat down and taught his climbing companions. Now, this is from the contemporary version of the Bible called The Message. And here it is from New International. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. So the first one, the first beatitude is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now that is from the New International. The Message says, "You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule." Those sounds kind of different, don't they? But it's always interesting to compare some versions and see what different interpretations there are. So this means, blessed are the poor in spirit. Those are the people who recognize their need for God. And that can be, they can be poor in spirit, and they can be poor in material possessions if they're in poverty. Or they can be poverty-stricken with both at once. But it doesn't have to be a hindrance to their happiness. God still wants them to be happy. And it depends on, the poverty-stricken, depends on what they do with it, with their poverty. Now, if they're spiritually impoverished, they can seek God. They can learn to seek God. They can desire the kingdom of heaven, and then it will be theirs. Now, the kingdom of heaven are people who acknowledge God as king. That sounds pretty straightforward, right? And so they decide whether or not. It's kind of like the cup is half full or half empty theory. They can decide what they do with their spiritual poverty or their material possessions. And if they believe that God is king and the kingdom of heaven waits for them, and they can pursue happiness. And they know they are spiritually bankrupt if they're without Jesus Christ. So here's another way of saying the first beatitude. Blessed are those who humbly recognize their need for God, for they will enter into his kingdom. So that's what we've been talking about, and that's the same thing. So there's a story of a young man who pursues God, and the modern version, I used this in a sermon once. He's in his sports car and he hears Jesus is in another town, and so he zooms over there with his music blaring, and it's a young man, and he finds Jesus and he says, "What can I do to get into the kingdom of heaven?" So he knows about the kingdom of heaven, and he has a desire to pursue that. So Jesus says to him, you're going to have to give away all your possessions, all your material things, and then, only then, will you find the kingdom of heaven and please God. And the young man was crushed because he didn't want to do that. And so he didn't say, okay, I'll do that, I'll consider it. I mean, maybe he did later, and we don't know that. But he got in his car, still with the music blaring, and left. And that was it. He couldn't handle that. So that's kind of an example of being of the material, being poor in spirit materially instead of spiritually. So I hope some of this makes sense. The Beatitudes are pretty fascinating once you start looking into their meanings. And so tomorrow we'll talk about another one. Have a great day.